Firstly, I want to thank you for allowing me to have some time with you, basically, to get to know you and the organisation. So do you want to just start off by introducing yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Nadeem, Rochdale Councillor Mosques. I'm one of the officers here that's trying to bring some continuity, some structure to our mosques across Rochdale. Some of you will know me from previously. I was the Chief Inspector here at Greater Manchester Police. I retired. And it's putting something back into the community now to try and make a difference, to have a bit of a voice, to understand what the needs are of our community and try and address them, both at a local level, but more importantly at a strategic level in terms of policy and strategy.
So when did you start your role with the Rochdale Council of Mosques?
So it must be about 2 years ago now. Right. They've been asking me for a while to come and do some work with them. And they've done a lot of good work prior to me coming. Obviously, I knew Rochdale Council of Mosques when I was part of the police service anyway, so it wasn't a new organisation to me. Right. You know, I think we've got to be really thankful to our ex-mayor, Councillor, Sultan Ali, who did a lot of work with Brother Tahir and all the mosques to set up an organisation whereby we can help and support each other, which in effect then helps the wider community.
Right, okay. And what would you say the organisation deals with?
Yeah, so I'd say initially the organisation is an umbrella organisation. We have the mandate of the mosque. Without the mosque, there's no Rochdale Council of Mosques. So albeit we won't interfere in their day-to-day running, and as you know, each mosque has its own structure in terms of its committees, its president or its trustees, whether it's a charity or whether it's a CIC. We won't interfere with that. That's their structure, that's all. Where the Rochdale Council of Mosques comes in is that we will assist them with their strategy, with their policies. So for example, every masjid now has to have a health and safety policy, has to have first aid policies, safeguarding policies. And it's much better when you have an overarching policy that everybody subscribes to, because then you can review that, you can ensure it's fit for purpose and that every mosque is following the same policy. So that wherever a child goes, wherever an individual goes to a mosque, the same policies should apply in relation to their safety. And that's what we're trying to do as a council of mosques. The second aspect is that sometimes it becomes difficult as an individual mosque to put forward the needs of your congregation, your community. And at times that can then be just multiplied by, we've got 19, 20 different mosques here in Rochdale. So it made sense to have one platform where all those mosques could feed into and those issues then could be addressed and could be raised. So for example, we've got issues in relation to Muslim burials. So Rochdale Council of Mosques, alhamdulillah, prior to me coming, took the lead on that. We have the cemetery over at Dinas for the Muslim community, but it's also still an obligation of the local authority to still provide that service. They can't abrogate that service, but what we can do is we can assist with that service and ensure it meets the needs of our community. Because as you know, we will have out of hours burials. We need to bury as soon as possible, not within 24 hours, as sometimes a common misconception is. It is as soon as possible. And you can only achieve that through working in partnership with the statutory organisations.
What difficulties have you faced when you've come into Rochdale Council of Mosques?
Well, alhamdulillah, I would say that difficulties are very few and far between. Because your intention is about bringing communities together. We all talk about unity, coming together. It's very difficult to get everybody unified. But what you can do is you can have a common voice and a common platform. So I suppose one of the major difficulties were in terms of what our relationship was with statutory authorities, with the voluntary sector, with the community. So, for example, I heard a lot about, well, we don't know what Rochdale Council of Mosques does. Who are you? What is your purpose? A lot of criticism would be around, well, is it not you just do the moon sighting for the start of Ramadan, which obviously we're in this blessed month, and telling us when Eid is. But it's much, much more than that. Alhamdulillah, I think, we've got to take, some credit for the fact that our masjids did come together on one platform, or I'd say 90%, 99%, in terms of agreeing when the start of Ramadan would be, and agreeing obviously then when Eid would be. And that is a massive, massive success for Rochdale. I get a lot of other towns contacting me saying, how did you do it? And it's not how did I do it, but how did Rochdale Council of Mosques do it? And that's why I go back to Councillor Sultan Ali, because he did raise that question. What can we do as masjid to come together to at least have one day? And that requires a big sacrifice, because when you've got two schools of thought, whether you're going to follow Saudi or whether you're going to follow Morocco, somebody has to give in somewhere. And I would say, you know, for the sake of unity, Idara, Rochdale Central Mosque was one of the biggest mosques that changed the way that they operated for the sake of unity. And that's what I work on. And that's where the difficulty arises, because that's when part of your community may turn around and say, well, why are you following them? Or why are you following them? Or why are you? And that is a case of division. But that division has come through years and years of conditioning. We've been conditioned to think that way. Yes. What Rochdale Council of Mosques wants to do is say, actually, we need to change the way we think. We need to change the way we operate. That's the only way we're going to be successful. Don't concentrate on things that you can't influence or you can't change. So for me to say I'm going to unify everybody is a fallacy. You would never be able to do that. But what you can do is you can decide on what those common areas of commonality are and focus on them. But again, you need the support and the backing of our wider community.
Who does Rochdale Council of Mosques follow for moon sighting and for, you know, like...
Yeah, so I think what was agreed from Rochdale Council of Mosques perspective is you've got one that will say we'll follow Saudi, and you've got the others that will say, well, actually, we need to follow the nearest Muslim country. And that's how we've always done it. You know, if you go back to our forefathers, that was how they did the announcements. Now we've got, not only have we got so much technology, we've now got a lot of influence from our community, from our young people saying, what are we doing? How are we doing this? What is the process? And I think in the early days, we'd rely very much on the ulama. Now you've got like the Crescent Society that looks for the moon sighting, you know, within the United Kingdom. And I can understand why some ulama may turn around and say, well, it's very difficult here in the UK because it's very cloudy often. You don't get chances to see it. But tonight's a prime example. It's a very clear night. And what Rochdale Council of Mosques will do is we will go out. We will physically go out. We'll have a look. We'll listen to what the Crescent Society is saying. But in the main, what the majority of mosques have agreed upon in Rochdale is we will go with the sighting from Morocco, who've got an established mechanism of moon sighting. It's a credible method of moon sighting, and also with South Africa. And I think that was the change, the turning point for Rochdale is that the majority of our mosques said, we will follow that process. And so tomorrow evening, Rochdale Council of Mosques will meet, all the masajids will come together, and we will wait for that notification from Morocco. I'd most probably say the last few years, what's been a little bit testing has been that a lot of people on social media are posting straight away. And Rochdale Council of Mosques cannot actually make a decision until all the sighting sites in Morocco have fed back their observation to their central authority, for them then to issue the fact that yes, it's been seen, or no, it hasn't been seen, and we have to wait for that. And that's one of the reasons why there's a slight delay. So what we did last year was we tried to update the community on our webpage and on social media to say we are still waiting, because what the community are waiting for is an update.
Yes.
And sometimes if you don't get that update, we become impatient, and it's our role then actually to say, well, actually, we're still waiting for 3 or 4 sites in Morocco to report back. As soon as we get that reporting back and we get the official notification, we will then let it out to the community.
That makes sense, because a lot of people ring me as well, because I do the Rochdale Milad Committee social media. And sometimes say if Maghrib was about 7 o'clock and you still not heard something by 8, half 8, they're saying Maghrib's been, why have we not done it?
And so it is incumbent upon us to inform our community and let them know and give them updates. It's a simple thing, an update, but sometimes we forget and we've forgotten. Yeah. So we've now taken it on board that actually, if it's going to be late, what we must do is provide an update.
Yes, yeah. In the meantime, how many mosques are member of Rochdale Council of Mosques?
So we currently have 19 masjids who are members. When we talk about the mosques that are not members, it's not for the reason of they don't wish to become a member. I think sometimes it's that they're waiting for a bit more information from ourselves. There's a certain criteria. Obviously, you have to be a mosque and do the 5 daily prayers in the congregation to become a member, but it's open to all the masjids.
Yeah. What would you say to someone like myself that doesn't have that much knowledge about Rochdale Council of Mosques? As a mosque, what are the benefits for the mosque to become a member?
Right, so and it's a really, really valid question, because, if we're asking a mosque to become a member, the mosque needs to know, well, actually, what you're doing. So I'd say the reasons why we need that membership, or the benefits for you as membership, is, first of all, we can coordinate training. So training in terms of first aid, training in terms of health and safety, training in terms of marshalling, student behaviour. That's all training that we would have that is accredited and is acknowledged as being training that's accepted. So, for example, safeguarding training has to be done every 3 years, and you have to have a certificate for that. So we can ensure that the level of training is professional and is then acceptable. So, for example, if a complaint's made around safeguarding for a mosque, we can advocate on behalf of that mosque. And I do that quite regularly. I speak to the local authority designated officer. Complaints are sometimes received from schools, sometimes from parents, sometimes from individuals. We have some of that expertise that we can deal with those issues. And sometimes it's not about pointing the finger, it's about learning. And if, something has fallen, the policy is not being followed correctly, we can advise as to what needs to be done for that. That's one aspect. The second aspect is you become, as a body, a much more powerful, influencing voice. So, for example, I would say out of the 19 mosques, we have a regular congregation on Fridays of 19,000. They're all members of RCM. Whether you agree with it or not, because you attend the mosque that has given us the mandate to speak on your behalf, you're actually a member. So whenever you raise something with your own particular mosque, your own committee, that can be raised at an RCM level, where we can then portray that to, whether it's with the local authority, with the police, with the GM mayor, with our MP. You have a much stronger platform to have that voice. It's not about this Nadeem show that Nadeem goes and meets there. I represent the voices of the Muslim community of Rochdale. And you have a say in that through your own mosque. But you have to participate in the mosque. I think one of the common misconceptions is that people say to me, well, it's a closed shop, the mosque. You can't get into the mosque. Your face has to fit. Whenever we want to try and change something in the mosque, we just don't get a look in. What I say back to those individuals is, what have you done for your mosque? What have you volunteered? What have you brought forward? What have you presented as an initiative, say, for example? And what have you put into developing that initiative and running that? Because there's very few mosques that will turn initiatives down if it's for the benefit of the wider community. But you have to engage. I think it's easy sometimes from the outside for us to complain. And what I always say is that first and foremost, we need to be grateful to our forefathers who made the biggest sacrifice. We've made no sacrifices, to be honest with you. The biggest sacrifices were made by our forefathers, who were earning £8-9 a week. £2 they would give to the masjid. They would look after their families here. They would look after their families back home. But they established our foundations. It's now our role to take it to that next level. And I think that's where RCM comes into its own, that we have the knowledge, we have the skills to be able to interact with the systems and processes that govern us. Because the days are gone now of no accountability. At one time, mosques could operate, there was no accountability. Most mosques now are charities. You've got terms, you've got conditions. You must meet them. And we cannot rely on "I did not know" as an excuse. So this is where we come into our own, that we have that professional overview, we have that skill, we have that ability, we can advise and we can guide.
I mean, Nadeem, I'm fully on board with what you've just said there. I've recently lost my father, And one of the main reasons I've started doing this kind of podcast interview type of thing is I know information what my dad told me what it was like in 1962 when he arrived in the UK. Sneri Mosque, the Golden Mosque, was the first mosque, and my dad did a lot of work around that, but it's not documented or recorded. But this, what you're saying today, for future generations, they can always look back and say, look, this is what Rochdale Council of Mosques was doing in this year.
I mean, it's so important to recognise that. And the other aspect is, I think, as a community, it's much easier for us to complain, to pick out points, things that we're unhappy with, without necessarily providing solutions. And the sort of road that I'm trying to take Rochdale Council of Mosques down is to be more solution focused, be more optimistic, because the challenges are coming. There are a lot of challenges we can see, you know, whenever we open the media, we look at social media, there's a very, very strong anti-Muslim agenda out there by individuals. You know, the far right are increasing their footprint, and we are being villainized, we're being scapegoated. Whenever there's an issue within the Muslim community, rather than it being an individual offender, it becomes a Muslim community issue. And we have the right to, you know, to respond to that. We have a counter-narrative. But those counter-narratives have to be produced. Those strategies, those policy documents have to be there when you're making an argument against somebody that is accusing you as a community as being the problem. You are the issue, you are the problem. And I need to look at it from a focus of, actually, sometimes it's a much wider issue, not necessarily just focused on Muslims. So, for example, if we take child sexual exploitation, the media will portray it as a Muslim Pakistani issue, when the statistics quite clearly show that actually it's not particular to one group or ethnicity. And the police have most probably said this time and time again. Then you get an argument that will say the authorities never took action because they were frightened of being labelled as being racist. Now, that just isn't true. Those weren't the reasons why there was a lot of inaction in those days. Part of it was possibly the culture of that organisation. But yet, we've been scapegoated as being that issue. The far right have picked that up. And a lot of you will see, a lot of their media rhetoric is around, we need to send these people back. These are the causes of the problems within our community. And that's when you get the far right getting a much stronger platform. What I say to our masjids is that we shouldn't be frightened of speaking out against injustice. If there's an injustice done, whether it's through the media, whether it's a politician's speech, whether it's something that's being broadcast, we should challenge that if it's wrong. If it's wrong, if it's unjust, we should challenge that. And that's where I'm saying, from a Rochdale Council of Mosques perspective, we're much stronger when you have a platform that's in a position to be able to challenge those injustices. So we're moving away from that grassroots level of providing, you know, services at a mosque level, because I would leave that to the masjids. They're very good at doing that. They can continue doing that. Where RCM comes in is at that strategic level, when policies are being developed by the local authority or nationally. When consultation comes out, we're in a much better position to be able to review that consultation, that policy, and make sure that it's fit for purpose, that it's equitable across all communities. I think far too often, a lot of us are very busy. We don't have the time and we can't do it, so we ignore it. And it's at our peril. A lot of the things, whether it's the prevent strategy, whether it's the immigration, Section 40 that's coming out, these are going to impact us. So what I'm saying is that there are times when you review a policy and you can amend it. That's the purpose of a consultation. But to do that, I need two things. One, I need the support of the wider community. And secondly, you need a resource. People have got to accept that nothing happens for free. You need a resource there to be able to become effective. The days of volunteering are over. You know, you can see some mosques now that actually, alhamdulillah, have started to employ caretakers, managers, and it's important because you want a service. You know, as a community member, we donate to those mosques for a service, and that service, we cannot rely on volunteers. Because, you know, if you're a volunteer and you say, I'll clean the mosque, and then one day you can't for whatever reason, I can't hold you accountable because you're a volunteer.
Exactly. Yeah.
But as a cleaner, I can hold you accountable. So we've got to be more professional in how we portray ourselves. And we've got to really start counteracting the negative narrative that is currently becoming mainstream about the Muslim community.
Definitely. I'm very lucky to have you as a retired police inspector, Greater Manchester Police. Mashallah, you know the networking and the community links that we need. In regards to what is the Building Trust and Tackling Hate Crime project?
Right, so Building Trust, the Partnership Building Trust and Confidence Plan is a plan that Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor, asked us to work on after the incident at Manchester Airport. So you remember the incident, the brothers that got involved in the incident at Manchester Airport, that obviously caused a lot of issues within the community. We then had Southport, and again, negatively, it came onto the mosques. It's the Mosques, the Muslims, and that was totally, you know, disinformation. It wasn't misinformation, it was disinformation that was disseminated. So Andy Burnham came down to Rochdale, we had 2 meetings with him, and we created a plan. And the plan is, this isn't just about reporting issues, it's about what are the causes of those issues. Why is it that as Muslims we've lost a lot of trust and confidence in the authorities? Why is it that we don't trust the media anymore? Why is it that we sometimes, you know, we question our politicians because we feel that they may be not representing what we're asking them to represent? And what are our structures, systems and processes? So we put a plan together which we've shared with the Mayor's office, we've shared here with the local authority and the police, to say that, look, these are some of the programmes that need to be brought into Rochdale to start rebuilding that trust and confidence in the services that are there to provide equitable service provision across the board. I would never say to a service provider that you have a sole responsibility to provide a service to me and my community. But what I can say is the service must meet the needs of all your communities and it must be equitable. And that's the reason why we've put that plan together. Part of that plan, we're now working on the tackling hate crime. We've done 2 seminars now on tackling hate crime. And what's really interesting with that is, what is it that the community are saying? Because I think we've got to move on from patronising our community at times by saying, report, report, report. And we constantly go on, whether it's with the police, whether it's community safety, whether it's local or national, we keep saying report, 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 which is fine. That's very important. But we also need to look at the causes of Islamophobia. What are the causes behind that? You need to address the issue that is caused in the need for reporting. And that's where our hate crime seminar is coming into its own. You know, we've had over 115, 120 people at each of those seminars now. And we've had some real good feedback from the community in terms of how they are feeling. And hopefully once we've done all 4, we'll produce a report that will have recommendations in there. I'm already speaking with community safety and the local authority and the police in relation to their hate crime action plan. We have a GM hate crime action plan, but that should feed into our local hate crime action plan to make sure then that we can reduce the incidence of hate here in Rochdale.
That's really good. Is that something that the members of the public can attend as well?
Yes. So like I said, we've had 120 at each of those seminars now. So we do send it out. We do obviously have to manage numbers because of the venue and health and safety, but it is going out to the crowd, and that's why we're doing 4. So they're across the borough. The first one was at Castlemere, the second one was at KYP, third one we're hoping to hold at Deeplish, and then the 4th one we'll do around Spotland, Wardleworth.
You've got me on board now, so we can record it and put it out there for everyone that can't attend.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Rochdale Council of Mosques has joined the Rochdale 10-year partnership plan. What is that and what are the benefits?
Right, so this is very interesting. We got an invite to the partnership, 10-year partnership plan, which is a plan that was produced by the local authority in relation to where we see Rochdale going into the future. So, for example, Rochdale Development Agency, Atom Valley, all the decisions that are made by Rochdale Council in terms of its prosperity, whether it's economic well-being, whether it's employment and education, whether it's about deprivation. The plan covers all the main areas to make sure that Rochdale, we start lifting Rochdale up as a borough. And we were seen as one of those key stakeholders to attend, and I've been to one of their meetings. We have another meeting, and what's interesting is it's that strategic level work. This is where your local authority is making decisions on you as a resident. You know, what's going to be best for you as a resident and what's going to bring economic prosperity here to Rochdale. And my argument there at times is, does that reflect all communities? And you know, and I always constantly talk about diversity, inclusion, equality, because unfortunately, nationally and locally, sometimes that's fallen off the agenda. And yet I think it's still very, very important. If you want to meet the needs of all your communities, you have to listen to all of them. And that's why, you know, I thank the Rochdale Council and the Chief Exec in particular, who invited us to that meeting to be that voice. And again, if I'm saying I'm representing the mosque through their mandate, that's where your voice will be heard. And the plan that goes in, we have an input into that plan. So I'm very excited about that.
There's another project, I believe, called Active Madrasa Pilot Scheme. What is that and who's involved?
So Active Madrasa is another interesting project that we're leading on here from Rochdale Council and Mosques, in that we know from all the reports that have come out from NHS England, the Health Service, that health inequalities is disproportionately high within the South Asian community. Diabetes, heart, stroke, blood pressure. All these are common issues and really affect our life expectancy, and really affect our quality of life. Now, every report has said that. And since I've come here to the Council of Mosques, the question I've asked is, the research has been done, report after report has highlighted it, what action have we taken? And unfortunately, I think sometimes our action by the authorities has been piecemeal, and there's been no longevity to it. So what I've asked is that if you think about your congregations at the mosques from a Muslim community perspective, we have the ear on Fridays, our Friday sermons, to be able to really raise awareness across a wide community, South Asian community. So the Active Madrasas actually came from the healthcare champions. So we had health champions in each of the masjids where we brought all the authorities in, whether it was nutrition, it was physical activity, it was diet, it was exercise, it was mental health. All the authorities bought into a program whereby at 6 of the pilot mosques, they would come in each week and give an input. And what they found was they had a much diverse audience than you would necessarily have at either your GP surgery, at a community centre, at the library, at other public institutions. The South Asian community had a much wider diversity of our diaspora, because everybody attends to the mosque, from our young children, from our, you know, our sisters, our brothers, right up to the elderly. And that was quite successful. It was successful in that we got another audience in terms of them understanding about vaccinations. So you could make an informed choice. I think sometimes there's lots of misinformation out there around, you know, vaccinations, health initiatives. And unless we raise that awareness in a setting where you feel comfortable, you're not necessarily going to understand those benefits. And sometimes you'll make a decision based on what somebody's told you. And it might be right, might not be right. So the Health Champions was one, to break down that taboo. And secondly, to get a different audience and ensure that the right information was delivered by the right partners. Active Madrasas has come from that. It's where we want to get our young children who sometimes don't necessarily get the opportunity to do extracurricular activities. Because as you'll know, a lot of our children, they finish school, they go home for a short period of time, then they go to the madrasa to learn Islamic teaching. And some madrasas, you know, are very, very good. Some are, need a little bit more support. Some operate 5 times a week. others operate 3 times a week. Those that operate 3 times a week, for example, Lantern, they've got time built in for extracurricular activities. Some masjids don't have that luxury. So the children go, they might be there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and it's about Quranic teaching, Islamic teaching. What we're saying is actually within that environment, can we bring some movement? So as they're learning about their religion, can we bring some exercise in there?
Yeah.
So if they're learning their Qaeda, for example, you know, part of that learning, you could introduce an activity as part of that. So it's a different way of learning, but brings movement. Secondly, what we can do is we can offer opportunities outside of the madrasa. So it might be 20 minutes before, 20 minutes after, it might be on a weekend, but we can get them to engage in more physical activity because, as you know, it's not just the Muslim community. Our children are addicted to their phones. They're addicted to the tablets. They're not like me and you where we were kicked out, go and play football, see your mates outside for, an hour or so. Gave your parents a bit of respite. Now they're just constantly glued to that. So we're now trying to say, actually, let's bring some activity because obesity is on the rise. We already know that we've got a disproportionate amount in terms of health inequality and health issues. It's only going to get worse. Yeah. So that's one of the things that we want to do. And, I've had really good uptake from our masjids who are really, enthusiastic about, what would this look like? What's this program going to look like? Well, we can still do our teaching, but we can bring exercise and movement into that. So we're very excited.
Fantastic. So, like we've mentioned the Muslim community, how is Rochdale Council of Mosques working with the bigger community? And what do we have like community iftars, open days?
Yeah, so for example, unfortunately, I'm only here, I'm here maybe 1 day, 2 days a week. It's not a lot of time, but that's all I could actually offer the Council of Mosques. Ultimately, really, it's a full-time post and it should really be a full-time post, just that I can't give that commitment. But, some of the meetings now that I'm attending, for example, the multi-faith partnership, that's very important because it brings our faiths together. So, for example, on Remembrance Sunday, we'll partake in the Remembrance Sunday. HMD, Holocaust Memorial, we'll impart that. Remembering Srebrenica. So the beauty of the Rochdale Council of Mosques is that we've made multi-faith much broader. It's not just now about one aspect. Now it covers all faiths or non-faith, because it's the wider community. The same issues affect all our communities. Community iftars, I want them to be done by the mosque. It's about your local mosque opening its doors, bringing people in that wouldn't normally come into a mosque. And that is really the responsibility of those committees. And with our support to do that. The Mayor has been very gracious in terms of working with Rochdale Council of Mosques and other organisations in doing a community iftar. So last year, you may remember, we had the first Mayor's community iftar at the town hall, and rightly so. As a large Muslim community here within Rochdale, it was only fitting that it was done in the main newly refurbished hall at the town hall. What we shouldn't be doing is saying, well, we'll give you a small hall here, or you can do a little one in this little corner. We should be proud of who we are. We contribute to the wider community and we are part of the wider community. And sometimes I might use the phrase one community and others may disagree with me in terms of that. But I always say there's one community, but with different needs. And if you understand those needs, you can address those because there's nothing that can't be addressed or there's not a solution towards. So mosque open days, I think, are really, really important. We should do more of those, especially in this moment in time when there is so much disinformation out there. And for example, Neely Mosque do a fantastic program. Idara does a fantastic program. Jalalia, Bilal, majority Medina Mosque, are really driven now to sort of say, actually, come and see what we do. Come and see what we do. Nothing's hidden. The media may portray it as being hidden, but nothing's hidden there. So we should, even if you look at Rochdale in Bloom, for example, that was a fantastic initiative that got the masjids to look at biodiversity outside of the masjids, doing the planting. These are all things that help the environment, but more importantly, it's things that bring all our communities together. If you look at the environmental health, we have our environmental group that goes around, each week, dedicated members of all communities, not just the Muslim community, but dedicated members of all our communities come together to be proud of the locations we live in, the streets we live in. So we've orchestrated and coordinated around a lot of the mosques, the environment around there, keeping it clean. And we should be proud of that, and we should be engaged with that, and we should all take part in it, rather than saying, it's somebody else that does it.
No. So you mentioned this before. The Muslim community in Rochdale, we've had one cemetery in Rochdale Cemetery, and then it's gone to Deanhurst Cemetery, which seems to be running out of space.
Yeah. So burials are always a challenging area to deal with. And I would say a lot of my time sometimes gets taken up, whether it's around the maintenance of those cemeteries, or whether it's just about the provision of burials. And this is why I say policy is so important, that if you have a policy, you can hold people accountable. If you don't have a policy, it becomes very difficult to say, well, actually, this is what was agreed, this is what's being delivered, they don't meet each other, so we can challenge. So you're quite right in what you say. Deanhurst was set up as the alternative to Alder Hill, and a fantastic provision there for us. So we've been in negotiation with the local authority to look at, where's the next area going to be, what is the land, and with everything, it doesn't matter which community you come from, the local authority has an obligation to provide a provision. The local authority's dilemma at times is, how do you keep the community on board across all communities? Yes. And unfortunately, sometimes the NIMBY system comes in terms of not in my backyard. So there's pockets of land that we sometimes see as, well, that's an appropriate piece of land. Why can't we use that? But it might be to do with planning. It will be to do with planning, but it might be to do with the environment. It might be to do with the drainage in that location. There might be a whole host of issues which makes it unsuitable. And also part of that is the consultation with the local community. So after sort of many months of discussions with the local authority, they have got a plot of land for all burials, for all residents of the borough of Rochdale. When I talk about the borough of Rochdale, that's the borough, Heywood, Middleton, Pennines. And that is at Summit in Heywood.
Right, okay.
So unfortunately, it is right at the other side of Rochdale. It's for the Muslim community, it's not ideal. And the reason why I say it's not ideal is because we have to bury it as soon as possible, as I mentioned before. Now, those burial and funerals normally take place after a prayer. And the normal prayer they would take part after is the midday prayer, the Zohar prayer, where majority of our funerals will take place when they can be accommodated. To get from Rochdale right over to the other side of Bury is quite a distance, and it's quite a trek. But we're only going to be governed by what land is available. If that is the only land that is available, then it's down to us to negotiate how best we're going to be able to facilitate those burials. So in an ideal world, it'd be lovely to have somewhere here. Absolutely fantastic to have somewhere local. And it's not for chance, all our local councillors have been involved. I've spoken with them all. They've all looked at what land is available in terms of council owned. And at this moment in time, it has been decided that that is the most appropriate plot that's going to give us longevity, because it's a very large area. And I think they're in the process at the moment of doing like the feasibility study around there. So we're involved with that as a council. We will keep the community updated as and when we get more information.
So I know you've got a newsletter and a website. How else would you say to the people that are watching that they can get their updates?
Yeah, what I'd say to the community is please make contact. The more that we can improve our footprint, the more that our community is aware of the work that we are doing. And I'm not saying that we are the only institution or we are the only voice. We are one voice, but we're a powerful voice. We have a large platform because we represent the mosque. We have the mandate of all our mosques. So what I do say is that, you know, we are trying to, you know, you do have to bear with me. I am a bit of a technophobe. I'm old school, you know. So it is difficult for one individual to provide a service that meets everybody's needs. And this is the ask of the community, that sometimes you've got to think, well, is it a service that we want? Is it a service that we value? Do we need it? And as a community, ask yourself that question. Do we need a Rochdale Council of More? If you feel as a community you don't need a Rochdale Council of More, then there's no point in me being here. But if you feel there is a need for such an organisation, then what I'm going to say is that we're going to have to put a resource into it. Now, at the moment, the mosque, you know, contribute to it, but a lot of the contributions made voluntarily, you know, certainly by our chair, Mr. Tahir Mahmood, you know, he gives us this office, for example, free of charge. He doesn't charge for that. He puts a lot of his own time, money and effort into that. What I'm saying is, as a community, do we value such a resource? If we do value such a resource, then the conversation we're going to have is, how do we resource it? How do we fund it? You know, certainly at that strategic policy level, where, you know, if you want an argument, let me give you an example, a very, very live example that will meet, you know, a lot of the conversations that people are most probably having at home is that if you have a policy that is institutionally possibly racist, for example, simply because that's the way that policy is being written, whether you call it unwitting, whether you call it bias, but it's written in such a format that it has a negative impact on your community, then that needs to be challenged. So if you have for example, the honour-based violence policy and strategy, I work very closely with local authority, adult care services and adult services to ensure that no policy has a detrimental, disproportionate effect on Muslims. If you have a policy that says that honour-based violence is done by the perpetrator's family and the community, you've got to ask yourself the question, what does that mean, community? Does that mean that as a Muslim community, we all come together and perpetrate that violence? That's simply not true. It's not in any way, shape or form. That can never, ever be true. But yet policies are written like that. And it's people like ourselves that look at that and say, well, how can you demonize a whole community in a policy that workers will be using, grassroots workers, their social workers will go out thinking, it's the whole Muslim community that has an issue about their honour. And that's why we've got to put this policy together. I challenge that. And we've been fortunate here because they have listened to our voice. That's now been taken out of the Rochdale policy. But that's just one of the many challenges. And that's where I'm saying to our community, if you value that, if you think it's useful, if you think it's a benefit, then let's have a conversation about how we're going to resource it.
One of my missions is to record people from Rochdale in positive light, and that's from all different backgrounds, to show what you've mentioned before, that Rochdale is being highlighted in bad media in regards to Muslims and grooming. Who would you recommend that I record next?
You know what? We've got many, many talented people here in Rochdale, and you know, I've been humbled. You know, since I've been working here, the number of people that I've come into contact with that are really, really passionate about their community, want to see some change. And so it's really difficult for me to say to you that, you know, one particular person, but I am going to pick out one particular individual, and she may not thank me for this. It's one of our
she's going to watch it.
It's one of our sisters. She's called Sabia Ash from Zeal Advocates. She does a lot of good work within the community, not only here but abroad. But she's passionate, as are a lot of our sisters. And I think sometimes the reason I mentioned our sisters is I think sometimes their voice sometimes gets subdued. You know, and I'm not just talking about Muslim sisters. I'm talking about sisters across the board. You know, if we look at the White Ribbon campaign about ending violence, you know, against women, you know, that affects us all. That's not, you know, the indigenous community. That's all communities, and we all have a responsibility to call that out when we see it. So I would that's certainly somebody I would suggest you interview, because ultimately this is about having that voice and ensuring people know that some of the good work that's been done here in Rochdale. A lot of the work that you do, with the Malad, with the masjids, these are things that sometimes our community doesn't see. We don't necessarily see it, and we just feel that we're in our own little bubble. But that bubble's much bigger.
No, it is big.
And so it's all about how do we raise that awareness, that positiveness, because there is a lot of positiveness. As much as we might think, oh, it's doom and gloom, we have to remain optimistic. We have to have hope, and we all have a part to play.
Yes. No, thank you very much, Nadeem.
No,
I really appreciate that.
No, thank you for your time.